You haven't lost years. You spent years believing you lost them. And that distinction seems small until you understand that it is precisely there, in that interpretation, where all the destruction happens. There is a collective illusion, silent and devastatingly effective, that life follows a straight line, that there is a right moment for everything, that there are windows, milestones, age limits, that if you haven't built something by a certain date, if you didn't find the right partner before 35, if you didn't found the company before 40, then you are late. And worse than being late, you are someone who wasted what was most valuable, your time. Carl Jung, the Swiss psychoanalyst who spent more than 50 years observing the human psyche with the precision of a surgeon and the patience of a geologist, reached a conclusion that most people will never have the courage to accept. The most persistent suffering of adult life does not come from what happened. It comes from the meaning you assigned to what happened. And as long as that meaning remains intact, no future achievement will be able to eliminate the feeling that something was left behind. This is the starting point, not a promise that everything will get better, not a message of encouragement wrapped in pretty metaphors, a precise diagnosis of the mechanism that makes people suffer not for what they lived through, but for the narrative they construct around what they lived through. Because suffering most of the time is not born from the event itself. It is born from the story you tell yourself about that event. A separation does not destroy a life. The story you repeat internally about that separation, that it was too late, that you didn't deserve it, that you lost your only opportunity to be happy, that is what destroys it. A period of professional stagnation does not annihilate a career. The belief that this period proves you are not good enough, that others moved forward while you stayed still, that the train left without you, it is this belief that permanently installs the poison in the way you make every subsequent decision. Jung called this a complex, not in the popular and flippant way we use the word. A complex, in the technical Jungian sense, is a psychic knot, a cluster of emotions, memories, and beliefs that organize themselves around a central wound and begin to function as a distorting lens. Once installed, this complex does not ask for permission. It simply operates. It colors the way you interpret a critique at work. It distorts the way you read the silence of someone you love. It transforms a simple delay into a confirmation of a theory you have carried for years about yourself, that you are the one who is always late, that the best life has to offer has already been handed to others. And what Jung realized that was most disturbing is that no amount of conscious effort undoes this knot as long as it remains unconscious. You can work 18 hours a day trying to compensate for the years you believe you lost. You can chase certifications, achievements, relationships, bank figures, but if the complex remains active, every achievement will be immediately devalued by the same mechanism that installed the wound. You arrive, look at what you built, and feel it isn't enough. Not because it isn't, but because the wound does not accept external evidence as a cure. Restoration begins, and Jung was very precise about this, when you change the meaning assigned to lived experiences. Not the event, the meaning. Because you cannot change what happened. You cannot give back the marriage that ended, the years spent in the wrong jobs, the relationships that fell by the wayside, the opportunities you didn't recognize at the moment they were in front of you. But you have absolute control over the meaning these events carry in the architecture of your life. And it is exactly this change of meaning that separates the people who build something extraordinary in the second half of life from those who remain forever imprisoned in a first half they can no longer touch. What you call lost years was, in reality, the only possible path for the kind of person you needed to become. The difficulty with this statement is not intellectual, it is emotional, because accepting it requires giving up the mourning for a parallel version of yourself that never existed, the one who didn't make the mistakes, who didn't lose the time, who arrived earlier. And as long as you are mourning that fantasy, the real version of you, built with precision by exactly what you lived through, remains underutilized. But here is where most people make the second mistake. They hear this, take a deep breath and think, very well, then now I will run faster. I will make up for the time. I will be more disciplined, more focused, more efficient. And the effort begins again, the frantic, urgent, guilty effort. as if speed could replace what only time is capable of building, as if the amount of effort expended could hasten a process that has by nature its own rhythm. There is a radical difference between effort and maturation. Effort is what you apply to the material. Maturation is what happens inside the material, regardless of what you do. A wine does not age faster because you shake it more often. Wood does not acquire density by being subjected to more heat in less time. A diamond does not form with more pressure applied faster. It forms when the right pressure meets the necessary time. And a human psyche does not develop genuine wisdom, real emotional balance, functional patience, or solid inner strength simply because the individual accelerated the pace of their external activities. Jung observed this in his patients repeatedly over decades. Highly functional, highly productive men and women who had built impressive careers, accumulated concrete achievements, built apparently stable families, and who still arrived at his office with the feeling that they were hollow inside, not because they hadn't worked hard enough, but because they had never stopped long enough for experiences to convert into understanding, for pain to convert into wisdom, for error to convert into a real calibration of the internal navigation system. There is a process Jung called individuation, the progressive movement of the psyche toward its own wholeness, toward what he called the self, the organizing center of the personality that includes both the conscious and the unconscious. This process has a rhythm, not the rhythm of the market, not the rhythm of social media, not the rhythm of family expectations, the rhythm of the psyche. And what people call unproductive years, phases of stagnation, dead periods, are very often the years in which this process is most active in the deep layers. These are the periods when, on the surface, nothing seems to be happening, but in the innermost structures of the personality, something is being forged with a precision that no conscious effort could replicate. Genuine patience is not a virtue you decide to have. It is a quality that installs itself in you after life has done something with which you could do absolutely nothing but move through. Real emotional maturity is not a choice. It is the result of having erred in ways painful enough that the error stops looking like an attractive option. Inner balance is not born from readings, practices, or techniques. It is born from having been completely unbalanced so many times, in such diverse ways, that the nervous system finally learns, at the deepest level, below language, below rationalization, what is and what is not a real threat. These qualities, maturity, patience, balance, inner strength, are what transform achievements into a legacy. They are what make someone who starts apparently late go further than someone who started early without them. Because without them, speed does not build. Speed destroys. The individual who runs fast without sufficient psychic structure arrives at the destination and discovers the destination was not what they thought. And then they need to start again, this time older, more exhausted, and with fewer emotional resources for reconstruction. It's not that you were standing still during those years. It's that what was being built in you had no visible form. It produced no measurable outputs. It appeared in no reports. But it was happening with the same inexorability with which the root of a tree grows in the dark, without anyone seeing, without any external effort accelerating the process, preparing the structure that will sustain decades of visible growth. The question is not why it took so long. The question is, what to do now with what you became during all that time. That is why I prepared the Código do Despertar for you. Not as another productivity system, not as a list of habits wrapped in psychology, but as a 60-day map built upon the structure of Jungian psychology, so that you understand in a concrete and applicable way what was built in you during the years you classified as lost, and how to use that raw material intentionally for the next phase of your life. Each day, a key. Each key, a question that goes straight to the core of what you haven't yet resolved. Each question, a concrete micro-action so that transformation doesn't stay on the plane of ideas and doesn't dissolve into yet another consequence-free insight. Over 60 days you read, perform the micro-action, and record your reflections, building, day after day, the direction that the previous years were preparing. The link is in the first pinned comment below this video. Read it now. If you've made it this far, something in you already knows it's time. Comment Desperto if you're ready to take this step. There is, however, A mistake that compromises everything said so far. A mistake subtle enough that most people commit it even after having intellectually understood what Jung was saying. The mistake of waiting for life to give back exactly what was taken away. In the same form, with the same face, with the same texture. You lost a relationship, and you keep waiting for the next person to fill the same space in the same way. You lost a professional path, and you keep waiting for an identical opportunity in the same sector, with the same structure you had imagined, as if life owed reimbursement for what was taken in an equivalent and precise way. You lost years you believed were your best, and you keep waiting for what comes next to be identical in intensity, in form, in promise, as if there were a department of cosmic reimbursement that analyzed your case and decided, yes, this one deserves to be compensated in the exact measure of what was taken. But life does not restore, life transforms, and the difference between these two operations is greater than it seems. To restore means to return to the original form. To transform means that the material goes through a process and emerges as something different, more complex, richer in structure and potential than it was before. A broken bone, when healed with proper care, becomes denser at the exact point of the fracture than it was before it broke. It is not the same structure. It is a superior structure. But if you are looking at the bone expecting to find the original structure intact, you will call the healing a failure. You will feel that something is still wrong when in truth, the tissue that formed is more resistant than what existed before the impact. Jung worked with patients who could not accept recovery because the recovery did not look like what they had lost. A woman who had lost a 20-year marriage could not recognize as real the love she found afterward, because the subsequent love had a completely different texture, quieter, denser, less dramatic. And she unconsciously had equated dramatic intensity with real depth. What she called a lack of feeling was, in truth, an absence of anxiety. What she felt as emptiness was peace. She had confused the calm with indifference because she had never known intimacy without turbulence. The cure was happening. She couldn't see it because she was looking for the old form of what had been wounded. A man who had lost nearly a decade of a promising career because of a serious illness could not see the consultancy he built afterward as legitimate, because it was smaller in volume, because he saw fewer clients, because the structure didn't have the size he had planned for himself when he was young, and hadn't yet understood the real cost of certain speeds. What he couldn't see was that those years of illness, of fragility, of confronting his own limits had installed in him an understanding of human vulnerability, of what really matters in a work relationship, of how to accompany someone in crisis with real presence, qualities that none of his competitors who had followed the linear path possessed. He was measuring volume. Life had delivered depth, and depth, in the long run, is what sustains. Many people do not notice the restoration because they are looking in the wrong place. They are waiting for the past to return with another face, and while their eyes are fixed on what was, what is, passes them by without being recognized. Transformation does not announce itself. It does not arrive in the form you imagined when you made your plans. It arrives in the form you needed, not the one you had desired. And recognizing this difference requires a specific type of discernment that ironically only the years you called unproductive develop. The Código do Despertar was built to guide you exactly in this recognition, so that you stop looking for the old form of what was lost and start recognizing the new form of what was built. 60 days, 1 lesson per day, a concrete direction. The link is in the first pinned comment. Every day that passes without this recognition is a day in which transformation is already happening, but you still don't see it. Don't leave it for later. But before we move forward, there is something that needs to be said about what you yourself hid from yourself along the way, because here is the cruelest paradox of this entire process. Often, the greatest obstacle is not what life took from you, it is what you yourself buried. Jung dedicated a significant part of his work to what he called the shadow, not in the romantic and cinematic sense of something evil. The shadow, in the technical and precise sense, is simply everything you rejected about yourself in order to be accepted. It is the sum of all the parts you learned early in life were not welcome, the anger you swallowed, because anger scared those you loved. The ambition you suppressed because ambition seemed like arrogance in the environment where you grew up. The creativity you abandoned because creativity was not an economic option. The boundaries you never set because setting boundaries meant risking the love of those around you. The spontaneity you sacrificed in exchange for approval. These parts do not disappear because you refuse them. Buried things do not die. They change form. They manifest as resentment without a clear object, as chronic exhaustion without an identifiable cause, as the persistent feeling that something is missing without you being able to name what. They appear in the envy you feel for someone who does exactly what you once wanted to do and never allowed yourself. They appear in the disproportionate irritation you feel when someone occupies the space you did not authorize yourself to occupy. They appear in the choices you make to please systems that were never designed for your specific flourishing. The practical translation of this is as follows. That which bothers you most in others is, with frightening frequency, that which you lack most in yourself. Not because the people around you are perfect and literal mirrors, but because the psyche uses the external to show what the internal is not permitted to express. The individual who has completely suppressed assertiveness will feel deeply disturbed by assertive people, even when that assertiveness is completely legitimate and healthy. The individual who buried creativity will feel a strange mix of admiration and hostility toward creative people, an admiration that quickly transforms into rationalization like, yes, but they have conditions I didn't have. Yes, but they are different from me. Jung called this mechanism projection. You fall in love with or become enraged by the quality the person represents, not the person themselves. You are in truth reacting to the reflection of something that exists in you and has not yet been recognized. The exhaustion you feel after socializing is not just physical tiredness. Frequently, it is the exhaustion of performing a version of yourself to keep others comfortable. It is the energetic cost of being who others need you to be instead of who you are. And this cost accumulates silently over decades until the system collapses in ways that conventional medicine cannot explain and that the person cannot attribute to any specific cause because the cause is not an event, it is a pattern. And here is where the years you call lost gain a completely different meaning. What you accumulated in those years was not just pain, it was material. It was the accumulation of parts of yourself that were compressed, repressed, buried, but not destroyed. They are there, intact, waiting. The anger you never let exist, the creativity that was never exercised, the direction you never followed because the social costs seemed too high, the talents that remained in a latent state because the environment you were in had no space for them. Jungian individuation begins, truly, when you stop trying to fix the past and start recovering what was left behind. Not as an abstract therapeutic exercise, not as a process of self-flagellation or endless analysis, but as a concrete act of recovering real resources. The talent you abandoned, not because it didn't exist, but because there was no space. The curiosity you stifled to fit into a box that wasn't made for you. The kind of life you wanted before you learned you shouldn't want it. There is a vitality sleeping in you, not in some idealized future that depends on conditions that haven't yet been realized. Now, compressed under layers of social adequacy, of others' expectations, of narratives about what is and isn't possible for someone in your specific situation. Jung used to say that we do not become whole by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. The process is not one of addition. It's not about adding more techniques, more habits, more content. It is about recovery. You don't need to become someone different. You need to recover what you already were before you learned you couldn't be. And the years you spent trying to fit where you didn't belong, trying to please systems that were never designed for your flourishing, those years were not wasted. They were the cost of the most necessary learning, knowing with clinical precision what you are not. And knowing what you are not is halfway to discovering what you truly are, not as a philosophical concept, as an operational starting point for the next years of your life. The central problem, therefore, is not the time that passed. It is the belief that you were late while that time was passing. And this belief, this specific belief about being late, about closed windows, about the best being behind you needs to be examined with the same coldness with which a surgeon examines tissue before cutting. Because it is not true. It never was. It is a construction, and constructions can be deconstructed. There is something that contemporary psychology, with all its efficiency and its protocols, has difficulty admitting, but which any serious clinical analyst observes repeatedly and consistently in their practice. Each person possesses a biological, psychic, and circumstantial time to flourish, and this time is not negotiable. It is not acceleratable by willpower or discipline. It is not comparable to the time of anyone you know, follow, or admire. Moso bamboo does not grow visibly during the first 4 years. You water, fertilize, care for it, and nothing happens on the surface that you can see or measure. And then, in the 5th year, the bamboo grows more than 20 meters in a few weeks. The question that matters is, was the bamboo standing still in the first 4 years? No. It was building a root system so dense and so extensive that it will sustain decades of subsequent growth. The growth that came later was only possible because of the years that to the naked eye seemed completely unproductive. The impatient observer who uprooted the plant in the 3rd year, because they saw no result, committed the most fundamental error. They confused invisibility with absence. Clinical psychology offers analogous human examples with a regularity that cannot be ignored. People who lived decades with the feeling of missing the mark, of not fitting into any of the available spaces, of being on a path that was not theirs, and who only in middle age or after it found the field of activity where all the previous years suddenly made sense as preparation, not as a delay, as a specific preparation for something that, without those years, would not have the same solidity. José Saramago, one of the greatest writers of the Portuguese language of all time, published his first prominent novel when he was over 40 years old. He was not a writer who had arrived late relative to some universal deadline. He was a writer who needed exactly those years, of manual labor, of observation, of life lived in layers that youth does not reach, to have something to say that was worth being read. Charles Darwin formulated the theory of evolution after decades of meticulous observation, of doubts, of drafts abandoned and resumed. He was not late relative to a schedule. He was at the exact rhythm of the process of discovery that a theory of that magnitude required. But these examples, although illuminating, are not the most relevant to you. The most relevant is your specific case, your particular story, your specific years, the specific question of why you arrived at this moment, with this video on the screen, with these questions still open, instead of having reached this understanding 10 years ago, or never having reached it at all. Jung believed that psychic life does not operate by chance. What seems like coincidence is, frequently, a necessity that hasn't been named yet. You are not here now because life was generous, or because luck favored you. You are here because something internal, some sufficiently mature process built in the years that seemed dead, brought you to a point where you are finally capable of hearing what you needed to hear. The capacity to receive this information was not the same 5 years ago. The years changed something in your internal structure that only now allows this level of conversation to happen. What is in front of you does not require more preparation time. It requires direction. The material is built. What is missing is the map to use it intentionally. The Código do Despertar is in the first pinned comment below this video. 60 days of daily lessons based on Jungian psychology. Not to transform you into someone you are not, to return you to what you already are, but which remained buried under layers of adequacy and survival. Each lesson is a key that opens a door you locked out of necessity at some point in your life, and which can now be opened with consciousness, without the cost it would have had if you had forced it before. You read, perform the micro-action, record the reflection, 60 days. What was built in you during all these years begins to take direction. The link is in the first comment. Read it now. The time for preparation has already passed. What begins now is different. But there is one last barrier, and it is the most insidious of all, because it does not appear as fear. It does not appear as declared resistance. It does not appear as laziness. It appears with the most deceptive face possible. It appears as legitimate reasoning. That barrier is comparison. We are not talking about obvious superficial comparison. easy to identify, visible envy, open and declared competition. We are talking about structural comparison, the kind embedded in the questions you ask yourself in an apparently innocent way. Why haven't I gotten there yet? Why did they succeed earlier? What did I do wrong that others did right? At what moment did my clock slow down while theirs kept the pace? These questions seem legitimate. They seem like honest reflection. They seem like the kind of rational analysis an intelligent and responsible person makes about their own life. But they are high-precision traps, because they presuppose that there is a universal there that everyone should reach. A single and standardized route, a standard time to which everyone should converge. And this presupposition, this social fiction built progressively by systems that need people to be comparable so they can be classified, hierarchized, and mobilized, is completely false. Jung never used one patient's process as a ruler for another's, because individuation is a radically particular process. What means flourishing for one specific individual can be imprisonment for another. What seems like stagnation in one life is incubation in another. What seems like success from the outside can be the most sophisticated form of self-annihilation on the inside. The universal ruler does not exist. You borrowed it from a system that does not know you, that never knew you, and that was never built with your specific flourishing as its objective. Social comparison not only generates anxiety, it operates a deeper and more costly distortion. It makes you invest energy in proving that you are competing, instead of investing energy in discovering what you genuinely are and what you genuinely came to build. It is the difference between living not to lose and living to achieve. And these two modes of operating produce completely different lives, even when the external results are superficially similar. The individual who accumulated wealth to prove they are not less than so-and-so, and the individual who accumulated wealth as a byproduct of doing what was genuinely theirs, these two individuals can have equal bank balances and internal experiences that have no common ground. You have already gone through the years in which comparison was an unconscious engine for decisions. How many choices did you make, not because they wanted to be made, but because you needed to prove something, to someone, to a system, to a version of yourself that accepted another's ruler as the only ruler in existence? How many times did you feel late relative to a deadline that no one at any moment in your life had actually agreed upon with you? The deadline did not exist, the ruler is not yours, and the judgment you made of your own life using those instruments produced exactly what any calculation made with the wrong instruments produces, a result that does not correspond to reality. The years you called lost were not lost. They were lived under a logic that was not yours, under a ruler that you borrowed without realizing and never returned. And the difference between this sentence and a cheap motivational message is that I am not telling you that life starts now and that it will be fine. I am telling you that the logic that produced suffering has just been named. And named things lose the power they had when they were invisible and operated in the darkness of consciousness. The feeling of being late is not an objective fact about your life. It is the result of a calculation made with the wrong ruler, applied to a clock that was never yours. When you remove that comparison, genuinely remove it, not as a self-help exercise, but as an act of intellectual refusal of a demonstrably false premise, what remains is not emptiness. It is clarity. The clarity that you are where you are, not where others are, not where you imagined you would be. Where you are. And that place, exactly that one, with all its specific and unrepeatable history, is the real starting point for what comes next. Jung spent his entire life documenting that the central problem of the modern psyche is the alienation of the individual from themselves. The gradual, almost imperceptible surrender of inner authority to external systems, religious, social, cultural, economic systems, that promise meaning and deliver conformity, that promise belonging and deliver invisibility, that promise security and deliver a cost that only appears decades later when the person looks back and realizes they spent their entire life being exactly what everyone expected them to be, and no longer knows how to distinguish what they wanted from what they learned to want. The return to oneself is not a romanticized path of self-discovery. It is not a journey to the mountains. It is not a spiritual retreat. It is a precise, methodical, often uncomfortable work of recovering authority over the meaning of your own existence, of recognizing that the ruler you used to judge your years was not yours, that the deadlines you didn't meet were not your deadlines, that the person you believed wasn't good enough was judged by criteria that should never have been yours. No one follows the same clock, not because that is a beautiful metaphor to soothe your anxiety, but because it is a precise description of how the human psyche operates when seen without the distortions that collective thought imposes upon it. The years that were yours, all of them, including the ones you cannot look at without feeling the weight, were the years exactly necessary to build who you are at this moment, not an inferior version of what you could have been. You, whole. With all the marks, with all the fractures that became denser at the point of impact, with all the understanding that only exists because it was bought with exactly the cost you paid. The illusion that there is a parallel and superior version of you, the one who didn't make the mistakes, who didn't lose the time, who arrived earlier, who made the right choices at the right moment. That illusion is the only real obstacle between you and what is possible from now on. Because as long as you are mourning a life that didn't happen, you cannot invest completely in the one that is happening. And the life that is happening, this one now with everything it has and everything it has yet to show, is the only one that exists. It is the only one over which you have any real authority. You can close this video and continue carrying the ruler that no one asked you to carry. Continue calculating what didn't happen based on a schedule that wasn't made for you. Continue investing energy in proving that you aren't late for an audience that, most of the time, is too busy with its own ruler to observe you with the attention you imagine. Continue waiting for life to restore exactly what was taken, in the exact form it was in, while real transformation passes you by unrecognized. Or you can do what Jung spent decades describing as the only real path to a life that isn't a copy of the life others expected you to live. Recover authority over the meaning of what you lived. Recognize what was built in you without your conscious knowledge, and use that material now with the consciousness that only these years could forge, to build what only you can build. The código to despertar is in the first pinned comment. The illusion is over. The years were not lost. What you do with that truth now is the only decision that matters.